Hello, everyone, my dear lovers of thrills and untold stories. It's me as always, and today we're diving into the chilling world of eerie adventures that happen in seemingly beautiful and serene places like mountains and forests. You know, I've always been a fan of hiking, but after today's stories, I might think twice before venturing deep into the wilderness again. So, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and prepare for what might be waiting for you in the dark forest.
My name is Adam, and I still can't comprehend what happened in that forest. I've always been a lone wolf, preferring solo hikes. It was my way of escaping the world's noise, the constant clamor of thoughts in my head. This time, I chose the old mountains to the north, about which I'd only heard legends, about wild, impassable places where human feet rarely tread and where nature reigns supreme. Locals told strange tales of people vanishing, of peculiar lights at night, but I just smiled, considering them typical tourist myths that added a bit of excitement. I set off early in the morning, when the air was still fresh and cool, and the sun was just beginning to pierce through the thick tree canopies. The leaves crunched underfoot, giving off the scent of autumn. I felt at peace, immersing myself in the silence, which was rarely broken except by birdsong and my own breathing. I walked for a long time, enjoying every minute of this solitary wandering. In the evening, I found a perfect spot to camp by a stream. I built a fire and cooked myself a simple dinner. The stars were incredibly bright. It felt like I could reach out and touch them. It was the ideal start to my journey. The next morning, I decided to deviate from the main trail. I'd heard about an old abandoned cabin that was rumored to be deep within this forest. They said some strange hermit built it and then vanished many years ago. It intrigued me. I walked, navigating by an old, barely legible map I'd found online. The deeper I ventured into the forest, the denser the trees became, barely letting any light through. The air grew colder and the silence became oppressive, as if the earth itself was swallowing every sound. I walked for hours, but there was no sign of the cabin. I started to feel like I was losing my way. Eventually, I came to a stream that, according to the map, should lead to the cabin. It was almost dried up, and the water in it looked strangely dark and murky. I followed it, and soon, through the trees, the outlines of an old structure began to emerge. It truly was a cabin, but it looked wrong. It was built from strange, twisted branches, and it seemed distorted, as if it had been squeezed from all sides. The windows were broken, and the door hung from a single hinge, open to a dark void. It emanated a chill and something else. Something very ancient and very sinister. The hair on the back of my neck literally stood on end. I pulled out my camera and started filming, feeling a strange mix of fear and fascination. I didn't go inside, and honestly, I'm glad I didn't. But I stayed there longer than I should have. I filmed, trying to capture every corner of this strange structure. As the sun began to set, I realized I was probably lost. The map I had seemed useless. It didn't match the terrain. I tried to find my way back, but the further I walked, the more everything looked the same. The trees I'd seen that morning were different. The stream was gone. I panicked. I decided to set up camp. That was a bad idea. That night, everything began. At first, it was just strange sounds. The rustling of branches, something like footsteps around my tent. I tried to convince myself it was animals, but it didn't sound like animal footsteps. It sounded like human footsteps. Then I heard whispering. It was barely audible, like the wind carried words, but I clearly heard it. It seemed close, yet also very far away. I turned on my flashlight, but saw nothing. I tried to be brave, but my heart was pounding in my chest like crazy. The next morning, I woke up and things got even stranger. Around my tent, on the ground, were some bizarre symbols made of branches and stones. They looked like ancient runes. Pure terror gripped me. I realized I needed to get out of there immediately. I hastily packed my things and left, trying to find my way back to civilization. I walked all day, but the forest seemed unwilling to let me go. It became even denser, even darker. I was going in circles. I knew it because time and again I'd come across the same fallen trees, the same strange rock formations. The sun was setting and evening came again. I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I felt that if I stopped, something would happen. That night, I didn't build a fire. I crawled into my tent and just sat there, gripping my knife. The sounds started again. This time they were louder. The rustling of branches, heavy footsteps, whispering that now seemed closer, right outside the tent. I closed my eyes and covered my ears, trying not to hear, but it was futile. I felt something touching the sides of my tent, light taps that made my heart clench. Then I heard laughter. Quiet, sinister laughter that seemed to come from somewhere inside me, yet surrounded me from all sides. It wasn't human laughter, no. It was something else, something unearthly, distorted. I just lay there paralyzed with fear. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like an eternity. When I finally dared to open my eyes, it was deep night. The sounds had vanished. An eerie silence fell. I slowly crawled out of the tent. The air was heavy and cold. I smelled decay? I couldn't place it. I turned on my flashlight and shined it around, and then I saw it. The trees around my campsite were twisted into strange, unnatural shapes. Branches were interwoven, forming something like giant traps hanging overhead. And from those hanging branches, I saw them. Strange figures made of branches and ropes, like dolls, but so grotesque, so horrifying. They hung, swaying in the barely perceptible breeze, and it seemed as if they were staring at me with their empty eye sockets. I dropped my flashlight. My legs gave out. I just fell to the ground, trying to crawl away, to escape. I spent the rest of the night pressed against a tree trunk, trembling with cold and terror. When dawn finally broke, I mustered my last bit of strength. I just ran, without looking back, through the forest, through the bushes, through everything that lay in my path. I don't remember how long I ran. It felt like forever. I just wanted to get out of there, to escape from what I saw, from what I had felt. Eventually, I stumbled onto some old forest road. I saw a car driving in the distance. I started waving my arms, screaming. They stopped. They gave me a ride to the nearest town. A lot of time has passed since then. I've never gone hiking again. I can't sleep in silence. Every rustle of a branch, every whisper of the wind takes me back there, to that forest. I still don't know what it was. Was it some ancient spirit? Was it just a trick of my exhausted mind? But I know one thing. What happened in that forest will stay with me forever. It wasn't just a hike. It was a descent into a nightmare from which I barely escaped. Sometimes I feel like I can still hear that laughter, quiet, sinister laughter echoing from the darkness that never truly lets me go.
I remember it was early autumn, when the leaves were just beginning to change their color to gold and crimson, and the air was filled with that special, fresh scent of fallen leaves and damp earth. My friends, Mike, Sarah, and David, and I decided to go hiking in a mountain range, in a relatively remote area where we calculated there wouldn't be many tourists. Our goal was to reach an abandoned shepherd's hut high in the mountains, where we planned to spend 2 nights. We were experienced hikers, so we had all the necessary gear with us: tents, sleeping bags, a stove, food, a first aid kit. Our mood was great, as a real adventure awaited us. The first day passed without incident. We enjoyed the views, gathered mushrooms, joked and laughed. We spent the evening around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling scary stories, not even suspecting how quickly those stories would become reality. The next morning, we set off for the hut. The path was steep, the trail became less and less visible, and around us, the forest grew denser, older, and darker. Sometime after noon, we finally reached it. The hut was exactly as we expected: old, wooden, dilapidated, but with a sturdy roof. We decided to set up camp nearby and leave some of our gear in the hut so we wouldn't have to carry it around unnecessarily. Dusk began to fall quickly, and with it came the fog. It was thick like milk, and within an hour visibility dropped to almost zero. We lit a fire, but it only dimly illuminated the small area around us. The cold permeated our bones, and we felt the atmosphere around us change. The lightness disappeared, and some incomprehensible tension arose. We became quieter. Conversations ceased. Suddenly, somewhere in the forest, we heard a strange sound. It was like a whisper, but very low, drawn out, as if someone was breathing next to us, invisible in the fog. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, gripping my hand tightly. We all exchanged worried glances. It wasn't the wind, nor an animal. The sound was too human, yet so eerie. David, who was usually the bravest of us, fidgeted and started looking around. Mike, trying to remain calm, said, "Oh, it's probably just the wind playing in the branches. Fog always distorts sounds." But none of us believed him. The whisper repeated, closer this time. It seemed directed right at us. We decided it was best to hide in the hut. Although it was old, it had a door and windows, which provided at least some sense of protection. We quickly gathered the essentials and locked ourselves inside. The hut was dark and smelled of old wood and dampness. We lit our flashlights, but their light only intensified the feeling of claustrophobia. From outside, through the thin walls, we heard the fog seemingly engulfing the hut, and that strange whisper became even clearer. Now it was almost by the windows. It was as if someone was trying to say something, but the words blurred, turning into an incomprehensible hum. We sat huddled together, trying not to breathe. I felt the cold darkness envelop me, and fear paralyzed every cell of my body. Suddenly, there was a knock. First quiet, uncertain, then louder and more persistent. A knock on the door. We froze. No one dared even to move. Who could be there? We were several hours' walk from the nearest settlement and, as we thought, alone in this forest. The knocking became unbearable. It was so rhythmic, so brutal that it seemed the door would fall apart any moment. David, unable to bear it, jumped up and grabbed the axe we had brought for firewood. "Who's there?" he shouted with a trembling voice. In response, only silence. But this silence was even worse than the knocking. It was filled with something sinister, expectant. Suddenly, Sarah started crying. She pointed to the window, which was boarded up with old planks. Through a crack between them, something dark was visible, something that seemed to be watching us. We saw the outlines of a non-human creature. It was tall, thin, with unnaturally long limbs, and it seemed that it wasn't moving but just standing there and observing. The next few hours were sheer hell. We heard the scratching of claws on the roof, quiet footsteps around the hut, as if something was circling us, and again that whisper growing louder, as if trying to penetrate our minds. But then something happened that made our blood run cold. From inside the house, from under the floor, a barely audible scratching began to emanate. It became more and more intense, as if something was trying to break out from beneath our feet. The air around us became heavy, saturated with the smell of dampness and something undescribably repulsive, similar to decay, but it was different, more ancient. The flashlights began to flicker, their light dimmed, and then went out completely. We were left in absolute darkness, alone with these sounds and the smell that seemed to envelop us from all sides. The fear was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I felt my heart nearly burst from my chest. We didn't sleep a single minute, sitting in the corner, holding on to each other, each with our own fears. Finally, as the sky began to lighten and the first rays of the sun pierced through the fog, all sounds ceased. The fog began to dissipate, revealing an ordinary morning forest before us. We carefully opened the door. There were no traces around the hut, no evidence that anything terrible had happened there. Only silence and morning dew on the grass. We quickly packed up and, without exchanging unnecessary words, began to descend the mountain. We walked quickly, without looking back, until we were far from that place. We never discussed the details of that night. None of us even wanted to think about what it was. But each of us knew that we had experienced something beyond our comprehension,
And although many years have passed since then, I still hear that whisper in my dreams, and I feel that cold breath of fear. This hike forever changed my attitude towards wild nature. I still love the mountains, but now I know that in their depths, things can hide that we're better off not knowing about.
It happened last year when my friends Emily and David and I decided to go hiking in some less traveled mountains. We thought it would be the perfect escape from the city noise, a few days in nature, just us and the mountains. We were experienced hikers, so we meticulously planned the route, checked our gear, and stocked up on everything we needed. The first 2 days were great. We enjoyed the views, the clean mountain air, picked berries, built evening campfires, and told funny stories. Everything was perfect, almost too perfect. On the third day, we decided to climb one of the highest peaks in our area. The path was challenging, but we were determined. By the time we reached the summit, it was already starting to get dark. The view was incredible. The sun was slowly setting over the horizon, painting the sky in all shades of orange and pink. We decided to stay overnight to watch the sunrise. We set up our tent, had dinner, and crawled inside, tired but happy. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't the sound of wind or animals, but something else, like the crunching of branches, but very careful, deliberate. I listened closely. It sounded like someone was walking around our tent. My heart started pounding. I carefully nudged Emily, then David. They also woke up and realized something was wrong. We lay there, holding our breath, and listened. The footsteps got closer. Then we heard a quiet sniffing sound, as if someone was sniffing the air. A chill ran down my spine. This definitely wasn't an animal. The sounds were too purposeful. Someone was right next to us, very close. Suddenly, the tent shook. Someone was trying to unzip it. Emily almost screamed. The three of us exchanged terrified glances in the dark. David, always the bravest of us, whispered, "Get ready. If they open it, we attack." The zipper slowly, with a creak, began to open. At that moment, I saw a shadow. A large, motionless shadow on the tent fabric. Someone was standing right in front of us. I smelled something. It was the smell of damp earth, some metal, and something unpleasant that resembled sweat and decay. When the zipper was halfway open, David lunged forward, shining the flashlight he held ready. The light caught a face. It was a man. His face was dirty, with long, tangled hair hanging in strands. His eyes were empty, but there was a predatory glint in them. In his hand, he held something shiny, a long knife. He didn't expect us to resist. David, knocking him off balance, started kicking him. Emily, grabbing a heavy backpack, began to hit him. I, without thinking, grabbed a trekking pole and hit him hard on the head. The man grunted, clutched his head, and something like surprise appeared in his eyes. He stumbled backward. We seized the moment. We burst out of the tent and ran. Without looking back, we ran blindly down the slope, ignoring the rocks rolling under our feet and the branches hitting our faces. We heard him yelling something after us, but we couldn't make out the words, and we didn't care. We just ran. We ran until we saw the first signs of dawn and burst onto a dirt road that, we hoped, led to the nearest settlement. Our legs ached, we were out of breath, but the feeling of relief was incredible. We were alive. Later, we reported the incident to the police, but they never found anyone. They said that sometimes strange people wander in the mountains, but that didn't reassure us. What happened that night is forever etched in my memory. It wasn't a monster from a horror movie. It was a real person, and that makes the story even scarier. We were so close to becoming another story that no one would ever tell. Since that day, I don't go hiking in remote places anymore. Now I know that real monsters don't hide in the shadows. They can be right beside you.
That's it for the stories today. If you liked what you heard, give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more. And hey, we'd love to hear your own hiking adventures in the comments. Stay safe out there, and see you next time.